My name is Munira Premji. I was born in Moshi, Tanzania, at the foot of Kilimanjaro. In 1979, I immigrated to Canada and made Toronto my home. I met Naguib at university and we got married. A few years later, we welcomed our children, Shane and Sabrina, into our lives. Over the years, we raised our family, enjoyed our careers, and built roots in our community. Then, in 2012, our lives took an unexpected turn. After being healthy for all of my life, I was diagnosed with 3 advanced cancers, all within a 5-year period. After the initial denial, grief, rage, and terror, I made the decision to accept the cancers and to find a way to not just survive but thrive through the challenges. I chose hope. It wasn't always easy. There were times when I needed help to get out of bed, to climb stairs, to take a bath. Those were tough days. But choosing hope and holding on to it every day, even when tired or uncertain or making difficult decisions, enabled me to move forward and find strength. I have learned that hope is an attitude, a promise, a way of life. You can't always control what happens to you, but you can control how you choose to respond. When you choose hope, anything is possible. Welcome to today's live Facebook event. I hope that you're all doing okay, that you're keeping well and safe during this pandemic that has turned our lives upside down. I'm Munira Premji, and I'm the author of this book, Choosing Hope, One Woman, 3 Cancers, published by Mawenzi House. I was scheduled to do a number of live physical events across town, and then COVID-19 hit, and all those events got canceled. Thank goodness for technology. Here we are on Facebook Live, connecting with all of you from across the world. And I just want to thank you and say how delighted I am that you are choosing to spend some of this time with us, particularly through these technical glitches. Today's event is particularly meaningful for me because today I get to invite, or I get to introduce you to my family. They have written chapters in the book about what it was like for them to walk alongside me as I battled 3 advanced cancers over 5 years. The truth is, you don't do cancer alone. And oftentimes it's the patient that gets all the attention. But I know that the true heroes of any cancer journey are the caregivers. My family was with me during chemotherapy. They sat with me while I was going through radiation. They came to hospital visits and supported me through X-rays and painful biopsies and countless blood transfusions and PET scans and CT scans. They were there for my surgery. When I was admitted to the hospital for days and weeks at end, they were there to hold my hand. They cheered me on during my stem cell transplants. They put up with me when I was on high doses of steroids and was pretty impossible to live with. They celebrated every little victory, like when I was able to climb the stairs on my own or take a shower on my own. They gave me hope every day that I would make it. Today, they will read excerpts from the book where they share their experiences, their hopes, and their fears. Naguib, my love, my husband, and an exceptional caregiver is sitting right here beside me in Toronto, Canada. And full disclosure,
I'm interested in the nurses, caregivers.
And then we have Naguib, my love, my husband, and an exceptional caregiver is sitting right here beside me. Right? And then I have my son Shane, live from Nairobi, Kenya. My son Shane, my daughter Sabrina, and my son-in-law Aksa was off. I'm going to now invite Naguib to read a passage from the book. In full disclosure, those of you who know Naguib know that he's a very private person, and this is rather uncomfortable for him. It's taking him out of his comfort zone, and we totally respected that. And then he surprised us and said he wanted to participate. So that takes a lot of courage and vulnerability. So I give you my husband, my love, Naguib Premji.
Thank you. So last weekend was our 38th wedding anniversary, and I decided that I would read a chapter from the book where I describe how we met. It's on page 18, and the chapter is called Jacques' Funeral Home, Naguib's story. It's not what you think it is. It was the winter of 1979 when I answered the hallway phone in our university residence with, "Jacques' Funeral Home, how may I help you?" The girl at the other end of the line was flustered and was about to hang up when I said, No, I'm joking. Who are you looking for?" It was Munira, asking for Karim, a friend of hers from Tanzania, who lived in the same residence as me at York University. Fast forward several months, and I was introduced to Munira by another mutual friend at Central Square Cafeteria, where we all hung out between classes. "I know that voice," she said, as soon as she heard me speak. "Aren't you Jacques' Funeral Home?" And so began our acquaintance. It was not until a frosty day in November when my friend Al-Nashir and I picked up Munira on the way to the university that Munira and I really got close. Rebellious Munira, standing on the sidewalk in sub-zero temperatures, wearing open-toed shoes, no gloves, no hat, jumps into the car, her teeth chattering from the cold. I immediately grabbed her hands and started rubbing them to warm them. And that began our courtship, which culminated in our getting married while still at school. It's difficult being on the other end of bad news. It's even more difficult when the bad news isn't about you, but about the person you love most in the world. Friday, February 3rd, 2012, 4:08 p.m. I held Munira's hands tightly as Dr. Wu finished his sentence. Multiple myeloma, an incurable cancer of the blood. My heart started pounding, and I silently began reciting prayers for help. As an aside to all of our smiley friends, that's Nadia Ali. I was reciting Nadia Ali. The doctor continued talking and explaining in as kind a manner as he could. I watched the shock and disbelief in Munira's eyes. "Am I going to die?" she asked. "It's variable," he answered slowly. Further tests would be required to determine how far the cancer had spread and the prognosis for recovery. "For tonight," he said, "we'll give you another blood transfusion and you can go home. Someone will contact you with an appointment with an oncologist." As for me, I had a sickly feeling in my stomach, like I wanted to throw up as soon as we heard the diagnosis. I had an awful, unshakable realization that our lives going forward would never be the same again. We are people of faith. To despair is to give up on God. We don't know why these things happen to us. We must accept, and yes, grieve, and get angry if we want to. But as one friend emailed us, the will of God never takes you to where the grace of God will not protect you. And so began our battle with cancer. Thank you.
You know, it's pretty crazy when you see the words on the page and then you actually hear it being said aloud. And as you were reading this, it took me right back to that moment some 8 years ago when we got the worst news of our lives. So thank you for taking the courage to take us through that, Naguib. And I will now take you to Sabrina. And what can I tell you about Sabrina? She is my bestest friend in the whole wide expanding universe. Nice masks, guys. Sabrina is truly a co-author of this book, except she refused for me to put her name on the book. But I love this girl and I carry her in my heart always. And I'm curious about what chapter you will read from the book, Sabrina. Hello. You can go ahead.
So I'm gonna choose the chapter "Love You Forever" on page 63, and just a bit of context. So when I heard about my mom's diagnosis, I was in Nairobi, and I had been working here and had been living here for a couple of years, and decided when I heard the news that there was absolutely no decision actually to make, that I needed to pack up my bags, pack up my apartment, and book a one-way flight to Toronto to be with my mom. She was my best friend, and my mom needed me at that time. And so I was there for 10 months to look after my mom and be one of her primary caregivers. And so I wanted to read an excerpt from "Love You Forever." When I was a little girl, I would sneak into my parents' bed every morning and cuddle up to my mom before starting the day. And though I am grown up now, I still find every opportunity I can to cuddle my mom whenever I'm home. We are self-acclaimed cuddling superstars. But yesterday, our cuddling was different. I held my mom in a bed at Toronto General Hospital while she was shaking from an intense fever. I cradled her in my arms as tightly as I could and rubbed my arms against her back, her legs, kissed her head, anything to make her chills go away. As I held her, I thought about one of our favorite childhood books, Love You Forever by Robert Munsch. In the story, a mother spent her entire life looking after her son. Whether he was a teething 2-year-old, a hormone-driven teenager, or a grown man, she would sneak into his bedroom at night, cradle him in her arms, and sing, "I'll love you forever, I'll like you for always, as long as I'm living, my baby you'll be." And this went on until one day she became too old and frail to be able to do it anymore. And so the boy held his mother in his arms and sang to her, "I'll love you forever, I'll like you for always, as long as I'm living, my mommy you'll be." My mom has held me through everything, more times than I can say. But yesterday, it was my turn to hold her, to keep her warm, to keep her safe, to tell her everything would be okay. It's tough seeing someone you love suffer and feeling like the only thing you can do is hold her for dear life, praying her cancers will go away. When her fever finally broke and she had kicked off the 5 blankets covering her, she immediately snapped into mom mode and asked me about my dinner date, coached me through my work, and talked to me about the importance of leaving a legacy. I've seen these cancers make my mom weak and vulnerable. I have held her hand as the disease has stripped her of her hair. I have watched the pounds fall off of her. But what they haven't done is touch her spirit, the stuff that makes her who she is. If anything, these cancers have made her even stronger, more certain, more beautiful. So I chose this chapter because it represented for me what our time was like during those early days, that we were at the hospital all the time. We essentially lived at the hospital, and that it's really helpless being a caregiver, that you can try and help in many ways, but the most you can do is just rub somebody's back or legs or just try and keep them warm, and that feeling of that you want to do everything you can, but you can't make the cancers go away. And that was really tough, and probably one of the hardest things about being a caregiver is just knowing that you can't help in all the ways that you want to help, and so you have to try and find the small things that you can do to make things a little bit better. And then I also love that story because it's such a testament to my mom that no matter how bad things get, she's at the hospital, she's living at the hospital, she's got this fever, she's shivering, she just doesn't want to do this anymore. And then as soon as the fever breaks, she's like, "Cool, what's up? Like, tell me about your date." And it's like she never forgot to be a mom in the process of being sick. And I don't know how she did it, actually. Thanks. Over to you, Mommy.
Wow, thank you so much, Sabrina. I have to tell you that Sabrina left everything that she was doing when she heard about my diagnosis and became one of my primary caregivers for almost 10 months. And I don't even know how you repay something like this. You know, she just knew what to do. She knew when I needed to be comforted and when I needed a hot water bottle and when I needed to be left alone. And she just had this innate ability to read me and give me what I needed in that moment. And I don't know how you did that, Sabrina. I don't know how you knew. What I do know is that I loved having you around. So yeah, this is hard. It's hard to talk about. And now over to Shane. Nice beard, Shane. Nice hair.
There's a delay like CNN.
One of the things I wanted to say is that I know that my diagnosis had a huge impact on Shane. And, it really got him thinking about what was important.
Okay, we're on a slight delay. So I think it's time for me to talk. Well,
Okay,
thank you.
go on.
So welcome to week 9 of quarantine in Nairobi. It's about 11 weeks since I got my last haircut, although I did shave my beard down. I can't believe there's like 60 people watching this, but I'm very excited to do a short excerpt from this book that I wrote back in 2012. So this was a very different time in my life. I was living in Toronto. I was working at CIBC as an investment banker. I was working between 70 and 80 hours every single week. And just a few months after this diagnosis, this is what I had to say. When you're working more than 70 hours a week, there's something strangely therapeutic about walking down to the bar on a Friday night. That was key, by the way, at 161 Bay Street. Lost in a sea of expensive suits and designer handbags and gossiping with colleagues. But the last few months have felt different. When friends talk about work, sports, or even the trials and tribulations of their love lives, I often sit there quietly. Sometimes I just want to stand on a table and yell. I'm laughing because I just saw a message from my girlfriend on the chat that says, does he have a girlfriend? Okay, back to the reading. But the last few months have felt different. When friends talk about work, sports, or even the trials and tribulations of their love lives, I often sit there quietly. Sometimes I just want to stand on a table and yell, why do you care so much about such trivial things? Don't you know my mom is dying? Other times I just want to excuse myself and leave and go home to be around my family. The other night I was stuck at work, finishing yet another urgent assignment. My mom had been admitted to the hospital with a case of febrile neutropenia. I really did want to see her that night, so I snuck away from the office at about 10 p.m. and headed to the hospital. Visiting hours were over, but no one noticed as I tiptoed by the nurse's station and followed the signs to her room. My mom was already asleep. I put the bouquet of flowers that I'd picked up from the hospital gift shop in a vase and sat by her bed, careful not to make a sound. I put my hand on hers. Her face was puffy, her veins bruised, but she looked peaceful in this moment. It's hard to compartmentalize when the very thing you're trying to compartmentalize is lying in a hospital bed right in front of you. I probably shouldn't quit my job, I thought. There's no way I could do this every day. I really like that chapter, and the reason I chose to read that excerpt is because it was really my raw emotions and feelings and deepest thoughts during that time. On the one hand, I was living in this life where I was going to work every day, working 70 hours a week, talking about work, hanging out with people from work. And then all of a sudden, after this catastrophic event in February 2012, everything was different. It was like the conversations I used to have were meaningless. It was like going to work every day just felt like it didn't matter that much. But the irony of it all, and it was quite selfish, I think, this feeling that I had, and I wanted to share it in this book. It was that when I actually went to the hospital to be around my mom, and I saw her, and her veins were bruised, and her face was puffy, and she didn't have any hair, and she looked sick, I didn't want to be there because it was too hard. And I thought, you know what? Maybe it is better to go to work every day, because being at work, at least I can compartmentalize and get my mind off things. And being there every single day with her was really, really difficult. And I commend my dad, for doing that, my sister for being around more while I was caught up in this other life. So that's all. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them on the right-hand side of the chat.
Thank you, Shane. My diagnosis really had a huge impact on Shane, and he really started to ask himself, what really mattered to him, what did he want his life to be, and he made some significant personal and professional choices, which ended up him being in Nairobi, Kenya. But yeah, those were tough moments, and thank you for sharing a tough story and putting out your raw emotion out there. Wow, really hard. This is really hard.
Yeah, too.
Okay, I can see that there are a lot of questions in the chat, and I'm wondering how we manage that. I'm wondering, Afzal, if perhaps you could read out questions that we could be responding to. Wow, really hard. This is really hard. Okay, I can see that there are a lot of questions in the chat. Sorry, give us a moment. We're working through this.
There's a time delay.
Time delay. Kind of like at CNN.
Yeah. So one of the questions was, although you've written it in the book, how what were some of the strategies you used to cope with the situation you were in?
That's a really good question. The truth is, I didn't start out very well coping with the situation. When I was first diagnosed with cancer, it was such a shock for me that, I would tell everybody, strangers in the bus, I would tell them, oh, I had cancer, and then they would feel sorry for me. Then I would feel sorry for me. And that's kind of the place I was in. So it wasn't until 3, 4, 5, 6 months later that I started to be better at coping with what I was given. And I think the truth is, my situation was really not good, and the cancers were very, very aggressive. And I didn't think I would have, more than 2 months to live. And then after the 2 months and the 4 months, I was still alive. And I thought, well, this sucks. This sucks. If I'm going to be alive, I might as well figure out a way to create a new normal and live my life. And so I went through the process of grief, from denial to acceptance. And I think it was only once I accepted and I submitted that I have this cancer, that things are not going to go back to normal, and that I just need to, work through it. So I think that was really the key thing, but it didn't happen immediately. And obviously there was the love of family and friends.
Here's another question from Alia Sundarji. What did you do to remind yourself on really, really hard days to choose hope? Days when you felt nauseous, days when you were tired.
Hello, Alia Sundarji. Alia, I remember when I was in the hospital once and I was incredibly sick, and you came to visit me and you wrote me a note. I don't know if you remember that, but you wrote me a note which I carry with me. And the note said something like, one day at a time, just like the seasons change, this too will be over. I don't know if you remember that note, But that's what I did. It was accepting that I needed to do what I needed to do for the situation, but that I needed to leave the rest to God, really, and that if I'm in this situation, and really recognizing that, tomorrow is another day. So I really did consciously choose hope, And your note to me came at a really good time for me.
This question came by WhatsApp from Faramita. What was your scariest moment and how did you cope with it? Any family member can answer. Do you want to answer? You want to ask Shane or Sabrina?
Sabrina, would you like to take that question? Consciously choose hope. And your note to me came at a really good time.
This question came by WhatsApp from Paramita. What was your scariest moment and how did you cope with it? Any family member can answer.
What's your scariest moment?
Yeah, what was your scariest moment, Subs? I know mine.
Yeah, I think mine was that ICU day. It was March 2012, so like just after the diagnosis, before we were even starting chemo, and my mom's blood counts were low and then got lower and lower, and we were at the Princess Margaret Hospital. I went in the ambulance with my mom literally across the street, like 2 minutes across, but the doctor wouldn't allow her to walk or for us to wheelchair her. And I don't think she's ever been in an ambulance before, so that was very scary. And then to get to the emergency room and really not know what was going on, and then to realize like the situation was bad and she was being taken to ICU and the machines were beeping, and I thought that we were losing her that day. And I think that was so scary because it was like we hadn't even begun the fight yet, and it was like we were losing it, and there would be no fight to have because that would be the end of it. And I think I had just come home from Nairobi at that point, and so I was still grappling with this news of the cancer, and now being in ICU and it being so, yeah, I was.
So what did you do to cope with it?
I think in the moment you don't really prepare. You just, for us, I prayed. I also had a new boyfriend at the time, who is now my husband, and he was able to come from his condo in Toronto and just be there as well. So ask for hugs when I needed it, because I think I just needed a lot of physical affection at that time and just to be held. And then just prayed that just God keep my mom alive. That was definitely the scariest day of my life.
It was the scariest day for me too. But just to give you a different story, I think one of the scariest, most challenging things was that moment early on when there had been one diagnosis of a cancer, and then like a week later, a second diagnosis of another cancer. And then there was just this feeling of despair early on. It was like this feeling that we'd never gone through this before. We'd never really seen what this was like. The prognosis on WebMD, my favorite doctor, was not so great. And so, it was just this fear. And the fear was actually, a couple of things. One was to watch someone you love go through something so difficult was a scary feeling. The other thing was just coming to the realization that the life that I thought that I had could evaporate overnight. It's like you picture getting married with your mother there. You picture having her as a grandmother for your kids. And all of that, could have been wiped away by this thing that we didn't anticipate or expect or know was coming. And it just scared the hell out of me. And so, Farah, one of my favorite people, thanks for joining the chat. Miss you. Your question was, how did you cope with it? I didn't. I just compartmentalized and I let it go because, what can you do? Yeah, I could say I tried to savor every moment that I had with my mom there. And I guess I did to an extent. But the reality is I just had to wipe it out of my mind. I stopped thinking about these sorts of things. So, that's kind of what I did, and it kind of is my modus operandi for those who know me, and it worked quite well. So because of this kind of delay in the chat where we actually don't know when our parents are speaking, we're going to ask the next question for you guys, and we really hope you're not speaking at the same time. So
I want to ask this one from someone that has become very, very close and dear to my mom, who didn't know her during the cancer period, but got to know her now, Tasneem Premji. How did you decide what to share and what not to share?
Good question.
And that's for both of you guys, actually, Mommy and Daddy. I know you were most reluctant to actually share your feelings for the book until we pushed you and said you have to write something.
Okay, over to you.
Over to you guys.
Holy cow. Tasneem, that's Teshu, right?
Yes.
Teshu, that's a tough question. How do we, first of all, so if I may answer, because you are much more open than I am. In fact, a lot of what's in the book are thoughts from the blog that was created as soon as Muni got diagnosed. But I was always in the background editing the blogs, making suggestions, etc. I wasn't going to write anything. And many of you know M.G. Vasanji, who is an award-winning author, 2-time Giller Prize winner. And he's the editor of this book. And how we got to meet him is for another day. But we were having brunch one day as the book was getting finalized. And MG said, there are a lot of voices in this book, but Naguib, your voice is missing. And I said, no, it's okay. My voice is there in the background. And he said, nope, I want to hear from you. And one of the last chapters that was written and incorporated in the book is a chapter that was originally titled, I don't even know how to say this, so I'm just going to spell it out. F*CK cancer. Because he was asking me, with all these cancers, how do you feel? And I said, F cancer. It said, that's the title of your chapter. You need to write. And it was hard to write because I felt like a grade 12 student submitting an essay to a professor with like a 24-hour deadline. And anyway, I was literally forced. How did you decide what to write? I was forced. And then with the Jacques Funeral Home, that story actually, typically when you are at social gatherings, you always ask, right? How did you two guys meet? So I've relayed the story before, and it was very natural to put that in. But that's my answer.
Yeah.
What did you how did you decide what to put in and not put in?
Yeah.
Is there anything you haven't put in?
Kind of like an open book. Kind of like an open book. Yeah. Let's take another question.
Yeah, we've got about 5 minutes, and so there is actually a very interesting question from Azmina, and the question is, can you explain how prayer played a role in your journey?
I'll start with this. When I was really sick, like over many months, almost a year, 2 years, I really had trouble praying. I know that sounds a bit strange, but I really had trouble praying. And I remember one of those chaplain, came to see me when I was in intensive care.
Because they thought you were going to die.
Yeah. And I had a lot of visits from the chaplains who probably felt that I needed to be saved. And, one of the things I shared with the chaplain was, prayer and faith is so critical for me. And yet right now, I don't have the energy. I don't have the ability. I just can't pray. And I remember being very comforted by his words where he said, right now you need to allow other people to pray for you. And when you're ready to pray, that time will come as well. And it did. And it did. And it is just a really significant part of my life. And I think it's what's kept me alive, because I know that I'm just like one ordinary person, but there is a God there who is holding my shoulder, who's saying to me, I got this. And so it just brings me a lot of comfort. Thank you for that question.
So if I may answer, what the chaplain said is not necessarily because of what the chaplain said, but we are, as I mentioned earlier, people of faith. And we try and go to Jamaat Khana every single day if we can. And when this happened, we looked upon the guidance from our faith, and that is how to deal with difficulty. And I mentioned the prayer Nadi Ali. That's just one of many prayers that you will see referenced in the book. So Munira is a social person. So what we did was, as soon as she came home and she was allowed to have visitors, we started having these gatherings. Impromptu. People would say, can we come home and visit you? And at that time, she hadn't started chemo or anything, so her immunity was not an issue. So we started having gatherings literally every day. And people would show up with food, right? Cakes, lots of coffee cakes and mango shakes. Thank you, Dilshad, and carrot juice and all this stuff. And we would eat, and then we would always end the session in prayer. And, we would recite verses of hymns and ginans, we call them, and tasbihs, which are prayers on prayer beads. And really, it gave us a lot of comfort. And for me personally, I have to tell you that very first night when we found out about the cancer, I was saying prayer every breath as I drove home, because Munira was in the hospital and I had to come home. And so prayer has played a huge part in our lives. And so hopefully that answers your question. Listen, it's coming up to 1 o'clock Toronto time, and we really, really appreciate you all joining us. Maybe I'll leave the last couple minutes for Munira to end.
So
Maybe talk about the book. That's it's still on sale.
So I'm so glad that you chose to join today. The truth is, I'm an extrovert and I love this, and I wish we could go on for another hour, but we're also very respectful of your time. So I think we need to end by telling you that this book is available on Amazon, on Indigo. You can also purchase it through the publishers, mwenzihouse.com. They have a special on right now. If you purchase it through them, you get a 20% discount if you put in the code, which is stay home. So I'd encourage you to pick up this book and share with us your thoughts after reading it. And I just want to say a collective goodbye on behalf of us all. Thank you for your support. You don't do cancer alone, and each one of you has played a very significant role in our lives. And we try very hard every day to pay it back in ways that we can. And thank you. The comments are fantastic. Thank you. I'm hearing from Shairoz Hasham, perhaps another Q&A session in the near future. Yeah, if there is appetite for this, we'd love to do more of these. Again, there may be a time delay, but I wanted to give Shane and Sabrina an opportunity to say goodbye and thank them so much for connecting today. So thank you, guys. We made it. It's 1 o'clock.
And with that from